Southeast Regional Fisheries Training Center here. Today we're going to talk about the Turtle Excluder device, or TED. Now you're going to find information on this in the Southeast LMR Bojack. If you turn to the shrimp tab, it'll have it laid out in a step flow format. You'll find a 71-inch offshore TED. That's what we're going to be inspecting here today. To inspect the TED, you need to follow all of the steps that we have laid out in your Bojack. Regardless if there's a violation or not, you want to make sure that you're recording your inspection on the NOAA 12L form. There's an email address on there that you'll send it to after completion. Regardless if you have a violation or not, make sure that all of the inspection is captured on 12L.
All right, step one. So what we're going to do is we're going to make sure that the TED is sewn into the net using heavy twine or rope. So as you can see here, the net is actually, or the TED itself is actually sewn into the net with this twine here, this green line. Now this blue line technically acts as chafing here. Now both of these will be sewn in around the net and around the entire circumference. All right, so the next step, going to be step two. What we need to do is make sure that this grid angle is the appropriate angle. Now you have to use an angle indicator for this, and you're going to use the non-magnetic side, as you see here. Now I'm going to take this angle indicator, I'm going to put it on the center grid, about midway, and I'm going to make sure it's between 30 and 55 degrees. So as we see here, our measurement is about 50 degrees. So this one's in compliance. Okay, now we're on step three. So the distance between the deflector bars should be 4 inches or less. Now these are deflector bars within the TED grid here. So what I'll do is I'm going to measure inside to inside with my measuring tape. All right, now what we have here is about 3 5/8 distance between these two grid bars. Now if all the rest of the grid bars look exactly the same, there's no reason to go and measure the rest of them. Spot check the one, make sure they all match, and then move on. The horizontal and vertical distance must be greater than 32 inches. So I'm going to measure my horizontal distance, all right, straight across, all right. We can see here that we have about 33 3/4 to the outside. And then my vertical distance needs to be the same, all right, greater than 32 inches. So I'm going to measure down to the bottom of the grid. Now, you know you might have some floats that you'll have to work around as well, but that's fine. You can work around those floats. We have 43 inches. All right, on step four, bottom shooting TEDs are required to have a float, and those floats have to be installed at the top half of the TED grid. Now, we can see that this is a bottom shooting TED because the seam runs along the very top of the net here. As you see the seam here, that's what sews that net together. And you wouldn't want that dragging across the bottom because it is the weakest portion of the net. All right. Now, the float can either be installed inside the net or outside the net, but it cannot be installed in front of the actual TED grid itself. All right. And the floats can actually be constructed of a hard aluminum or plastic or a PVC, as you see here. All right, step five. So we're going to be talking about the TED float requirements. So this is going to be based on the circumference of the actual TED itself. So for TEDs with less than 120-inch circumference, so you would measure around the actual TED itself. If it's less than 120 inches, they're going to be required one float, no smaller than 6.75 inches diameter, and no smaller than 8.75 inches in length. Now if that TED is larger than 120-inch circumference, they're going to be required one of these aluminum or hard plastic floats or two of these PVC floats, as you see here. All right, step six, we're going to be measuring the leading edge. Now, but being that this is an offshore TED, the leading edge has to be 71 inches, or the opening has to be 71 inches wide. So the way we're going to find that out is we're going to measure this leading edge from one side to the other. Now, the best way to break it down is in about 10-inch increments, because you're really going to have to stretch this mesh in order to be able to make the proper measurements. So I'll measure from one side to the other. All right, I'll pick up where he was holding the net. I'll measure another 10 inches and so on until I get to the other side. And it should be at least 71 inches. All right, now we're going to talk about the forward cut on step 7. So that's going to be measured from the upper part of the opening, as you see here, down to the bottom of the TED grid. Now it must be greater than or equal to 26 inches. So from this point down to the very bottom of the actual TED grid. All right, step 8 is going to talk about the escape opening. Now, how to measure this properly to ensure that it's at least 71 inches is I will grab this flap by the center point and pull it away from the TED grid. I'll measure from the center point here on both sides down to where the actual flap is sewn into the TED grid, which is going to give me my overall measurement of at least 71 inches. Step 9, we're talking about the flap length here. So the way this measurement is going to be done is you're going to measure from the bottom edge of the TED grid, make sure in the center of the TED grid, all the way down to the trailing edge of the flap, and that cannot exceed 24 inches. All right, flap attachments is step 10. So the way this measurement is going to be done, from the center of the TED grid and the bottom edge of it, you're going to measure down 6 inches. And from that point, you're going to walk the meshes horizontally over to the edge of the TED flap, and you're going to verify that the TED flap is not sewn in 6 inches below the bottom of the TED grid. All right, as here you see it's not. All right, step 11 is going to talk about the escape panel horizontal cut. Now basically what this step says is the escape panel itself cannot be sewn in more than 4 inches away from the edge of the TED grid. This reduces the chances of creating some sort of pocket that anything such as a sea turtle could get stuck in before being able to pass outside of the flap of the TED. Step 12. If the TED has an optional accelerator funnel installed, it still has to meet the requirement of a 71-inch opening. Now the way that you're going to actually do that measurement is you're going to measure from the trailing edge of the accelerator funnel all the way to where the actual accelerator funnel is sewn into the TED grid. Next, you're going to measure the distance that the actual accelerator funnel is sewn into the TED grid, and you're going to add that to your overall length measurement to equal greater than or equal to 71 inches. Step 13, the accelerator funnel cannot be sewn into the actual TED grid no more than the total circumference of the TED grid. So for instance, you can see that the accelerator funnel is sewn in from this point over to here, which is less than 1/3 of the circumference of the entire grid. Step 14, if optional chafing gear is used, it can only be sewn in along the leading edge of the escape opening, may not extend past the escape opening or beyond the very bottom of it. Step 15, escape panel mesh measurement. So the way that we're going to actually measure this is you're going to do a stretch measurement from knot to knot inside of one of the meshes on the escape panel. So you would measure from knot to knot, and it can't be any greater than 2 inches.
This concludes our demonstration of the Turtle Excluder device. If you need further information on this, feel free to contact us here at SurfTech, or you can check out our SurfTech SharePoint page. You can also find further information at fisheries.noaa.gov.